Okay, the head of the institution overseeing the housing finance system, Bill Pai, directly intervened in the governance structures of the companies under his authority. Sweeping changes were made to the boards, numerous staff members were placed on temporary leave, and individuals with controversial affiliations were appointed to senior positions. These actions raise serious questions about the impartiality of the oversight process and whether institutional boundaries had been crossed. During the same period, at a Senate hearing, the Treasury Secretary was questioned about the control mechanisms governing these companies. The Secretary responded by stating that day-to-day supervisory authority did not rest with the Treasury, but rather with a relevant regulatory agency effectively shifting responsibility elsewhere. This came despite the fact that hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer funds had been used to rescue these institutions. During the 2008 financial crisis, at the Senate Banking Committee meeting held on February 5th, senators voiced significant concerns regarding the governance, accountability, and legal compliance of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The response from officials was clear. The Treasury's role was limited, and primary responsibility lay with the regulatory agency. Now, let's take a closer look at the key moments from this hearing. Afterward, I'll share my own assessment of what these developments truly mean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the President announced on January 9th, in his words, quote, effective January 20th, 2026, I, as President of the United States, am calling for a one-year cap on credit card interest rates of 10%. In remarks at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the President further said, quote, the profit margin for credit card companies now exceeds 50%. He also indicated that Americans are paying 28–30% interest rates. You were one of his top economic advisors, Mr. Secretary. Do you support interest rate caps to improve affordability on credit?
I wholeheartedly support President Trump's policy, and I think that what you've just said would be in direct contrast to what Senator Warren said about this administration favoring the big banks. But those are facts.
Well, I don't think my statement indicates at all what Senator Warren said or meant. I wanted an answer. You gave me one. Yep. But let's look at the current situation. We already have legislation that protects service members by putting a 36% cap, not just on credit cards, but all credit relationships, and it protects them from being exploited. And as in my youth, I was a company commander and saw it firsthand. Would it make sense as a first step to provide a 36% interest rate for all Americans, not just service members?
36% doesn't seem like much protection to me, Senator.
Well, it's better than some of the things that are being presented to service members without the rates. These new plans to buy commodities, and sometimes the rates go to 500, and still today, you have entrepreneurs who are charging extraordinary rates, and particularly to vulnerable populations, which I know they don't congregate at Harvard Square, but they also don't hang out in New Haven either. So I think that would be a sound step, Mr. Secretary.
Senator, you haven't seen all of New Haven.
I haven't, but I've seen a lot of it, the parts that you might have missed. The situation at Fannie and Freddie is significant. We have significant federal interest financially in Fannie and Freddie. But under the director, Mr. Pulte, these taxpayer-owned assets are no longer in compliance with the law or with stock exchange listing standards. Pulte has appointed himself as director of both boards, even though the law says, quote, the director may not hold any office position or employment in Fannie or Freddie. A majority of the Fannie board has not been determined to be independent. The audit committee is no longer comprised entirely of independent members. And the the governance has been sacked by political affiliates. These all are prohibited by law and regulation. So how will you bring them into compliance, Mr. Secretary?
That would be FHFA, not Treasury.
Excuse me. You are one of the largest, or the taxpayers are. You provided them, Treasury did, not you personally, a $200 million bailout billion bailout in 2008. You have no interest in Fannie or Freddie?
I'm very interested in Fannie and Freddie, and I'm interested in its fulfilling the mission to the American people to keep mortgage rates low.
What about following the laws?
So again, you should ask Director Pulte. I do not see I don't think this creates a.
Well, all right, you have nothing to do with Fannie and Freddie. Director Pulte has said that you and him are, quote, very aligned, and we meet regularly about the conservatorship. By the way, it's in conservatorship because of Secretary Paulson, your predecessor. According to Fannie and Freddie's annual reports, the companies, quote, continue to rely on financial support from Treasury pursuant to our senior preferred stock purchase agreement, under which taxpayers own 1 million preferred shares on a warrant to purchase up to 80% of their shares. Treasury staff manages those shares and warrants for the taxpayers. Your predecessor, Hank Paulson, placed these companies into conservatorship. So you have the premise or the power to place Fannie and Freddie into conservatorship. I would think that gives you a little bit of leverage talking to Mr. Pulte about why he's not following the law. You're reneging on responsibilities, Mr. Secretary. And you're also, being the senior person here, your behavior to some of my colleagues is absolutely childish. Thank you.
What you just watched was essentially a lesson in how to evade accountability while hiding behind an expensive suit. This is the part Bessent chose not to say out loud. These are the details I uncovered by actually digging into the record. U.S. law is very clear on this point. Under 12 U.S.C. Section 4512, subsection G, the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency is prohibited from holding any office, position, or employment with any entity under the agency's supervision. The language is explicit, unambiguous, and leaves no room for interpretation. The statute plainly states it is not allowed. Yet, in March 2025, multiple media outlets reported that newly confirmed FHFA Director Bill Pai appointed himself chairman of both the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac boards. At the same time, he removed a total of 14 board members, 8 from Fannie Mae and 6 from Freddie Mac, as part of a rapid restructuring. Those removed were replaced with individuals closely aligned with Pai, including his chief legal counsel, a former partner from his private equity firm, and Christopher Stanley, a cybersecurity specialist described as having ties to SpaceX and X and frequently associated in reporting with Elon Musk linked government cost-cutting initiatives. According to Housing Wire, Stanley resigned just 1 day after his appointment was announced, but the more significant development came shortly afterward. On March 31, 2025, Senate Democrats sent PY a formal letter directly asking, does your appointment as chair of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac boards comply with 12 U.S.C. Section 4512, subsection G? That same letter emphasized that the FHFA oversees institutions backing nearly $7.7 trillion in mortgage loans. So why can't the Treasury Department simply brush this aside? Because when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were placed into conservatorship in 2008, it was the Treasury that executed the senior preferred stock purchase agreements used to keep them solvent. According to a New York Federal Reserve staff report, that intervention required $187.5 billion in taxpayer support. In addition, Treasury received warrants that, if exercised, represent 79.9% of the company's common stock, meaning American taxpayers effectively hold majority ownership rights. Yes, the money was repaid. The Congressional Research Service reports that by the end of 2018, Fannie Mae had paid $176 billion and Freddie Mac $117 billion in dividends, totaling $293 billion. Even so, both institutions remain under government conservatorship today. That is why Senator Reid pressed the issue. When a department negotiated these agreements, holds the warrants, and continues to carry substantial financial exposure, it does not get to say, not our responsibility, when there are credible concerns that the law may be being violated. What Bessent is effectively doing instead is providing PY with cover to operate without meaningful oversight, because if Treasury declares this an FHFA matter, and the FHFA is led by the very person potentially violating the rules, then the question becomes, who is actually supposed to intervene? This is not accidental. It is a calculated choice. Officials are counting on the public not realizing that Treasury, by virtue of the warrants it holds and the agreements it executed, has real authority to act. So when someone asks you at Thanksgiving why homeownership has become so unaffordable, the answer is straightforward. The individual tasked with regulating the mortgage giants installed himself to run them, temporarily placed an ally of Elon Musk on their boards, and the Treasury Secretary claimed it wasn't his concern. Even though taxpayers hold claims to nearly 80% of those companies. So why does this matter? When a regulator also serves as chairman of the entities he regulates, and there is no independent board left to check his authority, outcomes tend to deteriorate. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac together support roughly $7.7 trillion in mortgage loans, nearly half of all residential mortgages in the United States. According to a March 2025 Senate Banking Committee communication, these institutions are critical to providing access to affordable home loans for millions of Americans, including lower-income families and residents of rural communities. When governance erodes, conflicts of interest multiply, and oversight collapses, mortgage rates do not fall, they rise. And this is about more than present-day policy. These are the same institutions that required massive government intervention in 2008 because they were deemed too big to fail. Had they collapsed, the broader economy would have followed. What we are now witnessing is the gradual dismantling of the safeguards designed to prevent a repeat of that crisis. While the official charged with caring about the risk, the Treasury Secretary treats it as someone else's problem. So, what's driving all of this? Reuters reported in November 2025 that former President Trump publicly floated the idea of 50-year mortgages, with the FHFA involved in examining the proposal. CBS News later reported that the concept had not been fully vetted internally before being announced. Economists have widely criticized the plan, noting that the interest accumulated over 50 years would nearly double the lifetime cost of a home compared to a traditional 30-year mortgage. As of now, PI has continued to serve as chair of both boards since the March 2025 restructuring. Efforts to seek accountability have followed. Reuters reported on December 4, 2025, that the Congressional Watchdog Government Accountability Office agreed to investigate PY's conduct and alleged misuse of authority and resources. Still, at the February hearing, Bessent made it clear that Treasury does not view this as its responsibility, which brings us to the core issue. This is no longer simply a housing policy debate. It is a fundamental question of governance and accountability. Do conflict of interest rules apply to powerful individuals, or do they not? The statute is clear. The FHFA director may not hold a position in a regulated entity after the March 2025 board overhaul. Members of Congress explicitly questioned whether PY's self-appointment complied with that law. When Treasury's top official is asked in a public hearing about the oversight implications and responds with, "Not our department," it is hardly surprising that people conclude the system is designed to ensure no one is ever held accountable. Because when a regulator can potentially violate the law, install himself at the helm of the institutions he regulates, remove board members who might object, and the Treasury Secretary, whose department holds warrants in those same companies, Forward says is not his problem, this moves far beyond housing policy. So, it is oligarchy with a mortgage portfolio.